The day she arrived, it was raining. I had stood in rain before, border skirmishes in ice-sleet, burial rites in downpour, council meetings that dragged past moonrise, while water sheeted off the eaves of Dravenmoor's great hall. Rain was not an event to me. It was a condition, like cold, like the particular weight that settles in a king's chest when he has been king long enough to know that every arrangement made in peace will eventually be tested in blood. So I stood at the top of the gate steps in the rain and watched the Faireth border lord's daughter climb down from her carriage, and I told myself correctly that I felt nothing. She was smaller than I had expected. The envoy's letters had described her as a healer of some local repute, common-born but of blameless character, agreeable in manner. I had read that the way I read all treaty language, as a list of what they were not claiming. They had not said ranked. They had not said omega of standing. They had said blameless and agreeable, which meant she had no political leverage and they knew it, and they were hoping I would not look too closely at the terms they were asking me to accept in exchange for her. I had looked closely. I had accepted them anyway, because the blood feud with the Faireth bloodline had cost me 11 wolves in 3 border seasons, and I was a practical man. She crossed the courtyard with her hood down despite the rain, carrying her own bag the servants with her had offered. I saw one of them reach for it, and she had shaken her head once with a small, unhurried motion that settled the matter. Her hair was dark and flat with water by the time she reached the steps. She looked up at me. She had steady eyes, the color of river stone, and she did not perform anything, not deference, not nerves, not the careful brightness some women put on when they are being assessed. She said, "Alpha King Voss, thank you for receiving me." I said, "You are expected. Come in out of the rain." She came in. She did not comment on the hall's coldness, on the stripped ceremony of her reception, on the absence of any of the traditional Luna welcome rites I had deliberately omitted, the wreath, the elder's blessing, the formal presentation to the pack. She had been offered as a political arrangement. I had received her as one. That was what the treaty specified. I had been exact. She was shown to the healer's wing. I had put her there deliberately, rather than the Luna's chambers, because the Luna's chambers would have been a claim I was not making yet, and that was the first day. I did not intend to watch her. I had affairs to run. Dravenmoor was a large kingdom with a long border and an older pack structure than most of the surrounding bloodlines, which meant every decision carried historical weight, and every elder had an opinion about it. My council met at dawn, my border captains reported at midday, my war table convened twice a week. I had correspondence with 4 neighboring lords, and a standing debt to the Moon Court that required quarterly accounting. I did not have time to watch a peace bride move through my hall. I watched her anyway. Not deliberately. It was more that I kept becoming aware of her, the way you become aware of a sound that has been present for some time before you noticed it. She appeared in my periphery, and my attention shifted, and then I found I had been looking for longer than I meant to. The first incident of consequence happened 4 days after her arrival. Sorn was my eldest border wolf, 12 years old, battle-scarred across both flanks, and for the past 6 months entirely unmanageable. He had bitten 4 handlers and 2 of my pack surgeons. He would not eat consistently. I had been told by 2 separate wolf keepers that he was suffering and ought to be released from his pain, and I was circling that decision the way I circle every decision that cannot be unmade slowly, looking at it from all angles. She found him in the lower pen on her own. No one had directed her there. The wolf pens were not on any tour she had been given. I came around the corner of the lower colonnade on my way to the border captain's morning report, and found her crouched at the pen gate, speaking to Sorn through the bars. She was not doing anything dramatic. She was not singing to him, or pressing her hands through the bars, or making any of the ritual gestures the wolf keepers used. She was simply sitting at his level, speaking in a low, even voice, and her hands were loose in her lap. Sorn was 3 feet from the gate. He had not been 3 feet from a human being, without lunging in 6 months. I stopped. I did not announce myself. She said something I could not hear. Soren's ears moved forward, not flat. She waited. He took one step, then another. He pressed his nose against the bars of the gate and held it there, and she lifted one hand slowly and placed her fingers against his muzzle through the gap. He let her. I stood at the colonnade corner for, I do not know exactly how long. Long enough that my border captain's report was going to be late, which had not happened in 4 years. I did not speak to her about it that morning. I continued to my report, but I told the wolf keepers that no decision about Sorn was to be made without my direct instruction, and I rescheduled that particular circling for a later date. My council did not approve of her. They were not cruel about it, to their credit. They were precise. Elder Draven noted, in the language councils use when they want to say something without quite saying it, that a peace bride of common origin, however agreeable in character, might find Dravenmoor's traditions challenging to absorb. High Captain Mail said she seemed a capable enough healer, but that the pack would look to me for a signal about her standing, and that I should be deliberate about what signal I gave. Neither of them used the word Omega. They did not need to. The implication was clear enough. She had no rank, no bloodline of note, no wolf of her own. She was a gesture of peace, not a match. The pack would take their cues from me, and if I treated her as a true Luna, they would follow. But if I allowed the ambiguity to persist, the lower-ranked wolves would be the ones who sorted it out, and they would not sort it charitably. I said I would be deliberate. What I did not say, because I did not yet understand it well enough to say it, was that the ambiguity was already resolving itself without any signal from me, that the wolf pack of Dravenmoor, who had been taught by 3 generations of Voss kings to follow power and rank, were beginning to orient around a common-born healer who carried no rank at all, and that I had noticed this and could not yet explain it. It started with Sorn. Within a week of that first morning at the gate, she had been quietly admitted to his pen by a wolf keeper who had apparently decided on his own that this was acceptable. Sorn was eating consistently for the first time in months. 2 of my younger wolves, border scouts who had come back from the autumn patrol with flank wounds, had been seen waiting at the door of the healer's wing, which was not where pack-injured wolves waited. They waited at the surgery. They were waiting at the healer's wing. I asked the head wolf keeper about it. He gave me a long look and said, carefully, that animals had their own knowledge of trustworthy hands, and that he couldn't speak to the theology of it. The theology of it, I sat with that phrase for a while. The weeks had a shape I had not anticipated. I had expected to manage this arrangement the way I managed every political arrangement, correctly, at a distance, with no investment beyond what the treaty required. I would treat her well. I would not be cold to her in public. When the time came, if the feud held, if the arrangement proved durable, I would formally name her Luna, and that would be that. It was not complicated. What I had not accounted for was the quality of her presence. She did not make demands of me. She did not perform warmth to win my approval, or deference to manage my moods, or brightness to fill the silence. She simply inhabited the space she was given. When I passed her in the corridor, she met my eyes directly and said good morning or good evening, whichever it was. When she was admitted to council meals, she sat where she was placed and spoke when she had something to contribute, and what she contributed was usually specific and quiet, and not wrong. She was learning Dravenmoor's pack structure at a rate that suggested she was paying attention to something beyond her immediate social situation. She asked me questions sometimes, direct questions not about politics, not about my plans for the feud, but about the pack itself. The gray wolf who patrols the east corridor, the one who favors his left hind leg, has he been seen by the surgery? And then I would make a note and check, and she would be right that something had been overlooked, and I would find myself, in the act of checking, thinking about where she was in the hall. I catalogued this carefully, the way I catalog things that require managing. a warmth behind the sternum when she laughed at something the younger pack wolves said, a particular stillness in me, not the stillness of disinterest, but the stillness of arrived, when she entered a room I was already in. My wolf, who had been quiet for years in the way that old border soldiers go quiet, occasionally offered me something that felt like attention, a directed readiness, pointed at her, and I set it aside each time the way you set a fire iron back in its stand. Carefully, not urgently. I did not name what I was doing. I managed it. I was good at that. 2 months after her arrival, Elder Draven came to me privately. He sat across my desk with his hands folded, and said that the pack had begun to extend to her the small courtesies usually reserved for a confirmed Luna, that the she-wolves had started involving her in the preparation of the autumn feast, that 3 of the elder wolves had been seen accepting food from her hands at the communal table, that the wolf pups ran to her in the yard as if she had always been there. He said this neutrally. He was giving me information, not a complaint. I asked him what he thought it meant. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said in the old man's careful way, "The pack has its own sense of things, Alpha. It often arrives ahead of us." I thanked him and he left. I sat at my desk and looked at the border map for a while without seeing it. My wolf offered me that directed readiness again, and this time I did not set it aside. I let it sit. I turned it over. I had been king of Dravenmoor for 19 years. I had ruled alone by design, because a king who rules alone is a king who can be precise. Precise about treaties, about borders, about the cost of blood and the management of pain. I had watched my father love my mother with the totality of a man who has no armor against it, and when she died young, it had taken something out of him that he never recovered, and the pack had felt it, and the border lords had pressed it, and it had cost us. I had decided early that I would not be that kind of king. I would be the other kind. Wren, her name was Wren. I had been not saying it in my own head for 2 months. I said it quietly, to no one in the empty study. My wolf rose to attention the way it does at the sound of something real. The blood feud broke on a Tuesday. It was a patrol skirmish, which is always how these things start. 2 wolves at the border, one of them from Ferath's eastern line, a misread of territorial markers, a challenge that should have been walked back and wasn't. By the time the riders reached me, 3 of my border wolves were injured, and the Ferath border lord's captain was claiming I had violated the terms of the peace. I had not violated the terms of the peace, but the terms of the peace were thin, and the blood feud was old, and the pack memory of it ran deeper than any treaty language, and within 4 hours both bloodlines had wolves at the river gorge. I rode to the gorge with my war captains. This was routine. A king appears at his border, the lines hold or they don't, and you negotiate from the fact of your presence. It was not complicated. What was not routine was that she was already there. She had ridden out with the medical party. My head surgeon had requisitioned her for the injured patrol wolves, which was correct protocol, so no one had thought to tell me. I came over the ridge above the gorge, and there was my border line and the Ferath line on the opposite bank, and between them, on the flat stone of the crossing, there was Wren. She had not been placed there. No one had sent her. The medical party was on the Dravenmoor bank. At some point she had walked forward. The gorge is narrow at the crossing, perhaps 30 feet of open stone, with the river low in autumn, and 2 lines of wolves on either bank. It is a very exposed 30 feet. I had seen grown wolves lose their nerve at that crossing during border standoffs. She was standing in the middle of it. Her hands were open at her sides. She was not speaking, she was simply standing there, the way she had crouched at Sorn's pen gate without performing anything, just present, just available to the attention of any wolf that chose to look at her. Her healer's bag was over her shoulder. She had not brought a weapon because she did not carry one. The Ferath wolves were watching her. My wolves were watching her. The captains on both sides had gone, I can only say it uncertain. Nobody had a protocol for this. I felt it happen. I have been told by older wolves and older histories that the mate mark announces itself in different ways. A flare, a heat, a recognition that feels less like something beginning and more like something being confirmed. I had not felt it in 19 years of ruling, and I had stopped expecting it. It came the way she had come into my house, without announcement, without ceremony, in rain or in the plain air of an autumn gorge, simply present. A heat across my sternum behind the ribs pressing outward. My wolf went from directed readiness to absolute certainty in the span of one breath and said, in the way wolves say things without language, something that amounted to, "There she is. We have been waiting." That took longer than it should have. I looked at her collarbone. The mark was there, gold on her skin, the specific shape of the Voss bloodlines bond mark, which I had seen in the old illustrations in the archive and had never expected to see on a living person. It was visible from the ridge. In the low autumn light of the gorge, it was very visible. Both lines of wolves had seen it. The Fereth captain took a step back. I watched him process what he was looking at, the mark, her position, the fact of what the bond mark on a peace bride meant for the treaty, and I watched him reach the correct conclusion, which was that the political architecture of the last 20 years had just been superseded by something older than politics. I was already moving. 19 years of controlled, managed, precise King's Hip, and I crossed that ridge and went down the slope to the gorge at a pace that my war captains would later describe as not quite running, and I have never corrected them because I do not have a better word for it. I crossed the open stone of the gorge floor and I put my war cloak around her shoulders, the heavy black cloak with the Voss border sigil, the one that means, in the old protocol, exactly what it looks like it means, and I turned her to face the river. Both bloodlines were watching. I said her name in the old tongue, the formal address, the naming that the pack recognizes as a claim and a confirmation in the same breath. Wren of Dravenmoor, and then the words that follow it, that have followed it since before the current border lords were born, Luna of this bloodline and my mate. She was looking at me. Not at the wolves, not at the Fereth captain on the far bank, or at my war captains behind me, or at the mark on her own collarbone, which was still glowing with a warmth I could feel against my palm where my hand rested at her shoulder. She was looking at me with those river-stone eyes, with the same directness she had offered me at the gate steps in the rain on the first day, and she said, quietly, just for me, "I wondered when you'd say so." The sound that went through both packs was not the sound of battle readiness or political calculation. It was something else. Something I associate now with the moment a long-standing difficulty resolves, not with noise, but with the specific absence of noise that follows the end of strain. Both packs bowed. Not in the choreographed way of ceremony, in the instinctive way of wolves who have been told something true by something older than rank or bloodline, the way Sorn had pressed his nose against the gate bars and simply rested there, recognizing a trustworthy pair of hands. One by one, and then all at once, on both banks of that autumn gorge, wolves lowered their heads. The Fereth captain bowed last and longest. I drew the cloak a little more firmly around her shoulders. She let me. The mark on her collarbone had settled from gold to a warm amber, the color it would keep, and it was warm against my palm in a way that my palm had, I now understood, been waiting for a very long time. The blood feud ended with a renegotiated treaty, which took 3 weeks and required 2 separate council sessions and a great deal of precise language. I was exacting about it. I wanted the terms to hold. What dissolved it in the end, what the Fereth Lord told me privately at the final signing, was not the treaty language. It was the sight of the peace bride they had sent me standing in the middle of the gorge with her hands open, and the mark on her collarbone, and the Alpha King of Dravenmoor crossing his own battle line at speed. A king who runs to his mate, the Fereth Lord said, a little dryly, does not need to be watched as carefully as a king who doesn't. I considered that for a while. The Luna's chambers were prepared in the old tradition. The elder women oversaw it, which meant it was done correctly, and with the weight of every precedent Dravenmoor could bring to bear. Sorn was moved from the lower pen to the inner yard, which he occupied with the dignity of a wolf who had always expected this. The wolf pups who had been running to the healer's wing continued to run to the healer's wing, except that the healer's wing was now adjacent to my own study, and I found this not inconvenient. Elder Draven, at the formal presentation of the Luna to the pack, said that the bond mark's appearance at the gorge was the clearest confirmation of mate destiny he had seen in 40 years of council service, and that the pack of Dravenmoor was well served by its arrival. He said this with the particular satisfaction of a man whose earlier comment about the pack's own sense of things had proven accurate. I did not point out that he had also, 2 months prior, suggested I be deliberate about what signal I gave the pack. I was generous about it. I had reasons to be generous. On the evening after the formal presentation, when the hall had quieted and the fires had banked down to amber, and the last of the elder wolves had gone to their quarters, she found me at my desk, which she had taken to doing in the weeks since the gorge, appearing at the door with the same unhurried inevitability she brought to everything. And she sat in the chair across from me and looked at me in the way she had in that gorge. I said, because I wanted to say it and had been deciding whether to for some time, "You walked into the middle of a border standoff unarmed." "Yes," she said. "That was not medically required of you." "No," she said, "it wasn't." She paused. The wolves on both sides were going to charge each other in about 3 minutes. I could see it in how they were standing. I thought if there was something in the middle that wasn't a threat, they might pause. Another pause. I didn't know about the mark. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't performing anything. I just thought someone should stand there. I looked at her for a moment, and if they hadn't paused. She considered this the way she considered most things, straightforwardly, without performance. Then I would have been in a difficult position, she said, but I thought they'd pause. My wolf said with some emphasis, "There she is." I said, "I have been king of Dravenmoor for 19 years. She waited. "I have made correct decisions," I said. "I have managed the border. I have maintained the pack structure. I have kept the bloodline intact and the council functional and the treaties, where possible, durable." I stopped. I was not certain what I was doing. I did not give speeches. I did not explain myself to councils or to border lords or to anyone. I had decided, I said, that the kind of king who runs to someone was a liability. I had watched my father. I stopped again. She did not fill the silence. That was the thing about her. She never filled silences that weren't hers to fill. "I have been king for 19 years, I said again, "and I do not believe I have ever felt like one until you looked at me in that gorge without fear." The fire banked lower. Outside, the first watchwolves were moving on the night circuit, and I could hear the low sound of the pack settling into its evening, the way packs settle when things are in their correct order. She reached across the desk and put her hand over mine. "You've been managing everything," she said. "That's not the same as being afraid of it." Her hand was warm. The mark, mine matching hers now, amber at the wrist, was warmer. I turned my hand under hers. She let me. We sat like that for a while in the banked amber of the fire, while Dravenmoor quieted around us and the blood Feud's long shadow went, without ceremony, out. I had expected to feel nothing. I had been wrong about that, in the specific way that precise men are sometimes wrong, not because their calculations failed, but because they calculated for the wrong thing and the right thing arrived anyway, the way rain arrives, the way she had arrived, in the plain air of an ordinary day, without announcement, without asking permission, and stayed.